Hi everyone and welcome to Mogul Magazine. Today we have an exclusive interview with Mayor Marvin Rees. Hi Marvin.
Hey, how are you?
Thanks for joining us today.
No, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. I would love to know what were your earliest memories of you being politically aware?
So, politics in the broadest sense was just about, for me, whether the world is fair or not, and who gets what, who gets opportunities. And I think from a very young age, I was aware of some people being more vulnerable than others. I used to just call it feeling sorry for people. So I think I was tuned into a sense of that unfairness as a young kid. But I think my political awareness in terms of party politics really begun to develop in a more finely tuned way in my early 20s. I went to university to study politics, but then I did a master's degree in the politics of Black America. And I was reading King, Frederick Douglass, Malcolm X, all those people. And I think that was really begun to focus my mind on the importance of political systems and political leadership.
What were your parents doing to inspire the educational route you chose to take?
Well, that's a difficult question. I think my mum was the primary carer, really. I think my mum's real commitment to me was to make sure I was wanted, make sure I knew I was wanted and loved. Because just like many of us, I grew up in a world that seemed to tell me that my life was worth less than other people's, as a young black kid growing up around here, My dad's pool hall was on the end of Grosvenor Road, just down the road there, you could be chased down the street, you could have people call you names, you could be mistreated by police officers on the street, all these things. But I think my mum just gave me that really sturdy sense of being wanted. And I think within that, I had a sense that there was more to the world than I was experiencing. I thought there was a bigger story to be a part of. And that was the thing that gave me a motivation to actually start working hard in school. I mean, I was lost for a little while. I only got 5 C's at GCSE. I wasn't allowed to go to 2 of my classes. I wasn't a bad boy, but I was naughty and I didn't do much work. But one day I just thought to myself, do you know what? The only thing that's guaranteed if I keep behaving like this is that I will do nothing. So let me give it a go and see what happens.
How did attending Yale University change you?
Well, that was quite remarkable, the way that came back, because I'd come from my background, and then I ended up at Yale, and I was living next door to Lumumba Diaping, who's the lead climate change negotiator for Africa. He was the Southern Sudanese diplomat to the United Nations. I was next door with Alexei Navalny, the Russian guy that's in prison at the moment. And I must admit, I arrived at Yale feeling like an absolute fraud. They call it imposter syndrome. And I thought I'd been through this quite a rigorous selection process, but I was very sure they'd made a mistake and that they realized that they'd made a mistake once I got there. And they were regretting having me there. So it was quite hard being there because that was very real and raw for me. But I think what a place like Yale does for you is makes you believe that you're worthy of taking up leadership positions. And that actually was a big insight for me, that all those students that go to those universities, and you increase your chances of going to those universities if you have a wealthy background. I mean, they've done a lot on scholarships, but parents can pay $2,000 or whatever it was then, and they guarantee to increase your SAT score by certain points, so wealthier people get there. They get on that conveyor belt to power and decision making, and that was a real insight for me. But I had a taste of some of that, and it did make me feel more worthy of opportunities than I had before. But certainly it's an insight into the machinery that pumps out inequality as well. If you can get access to Yale, absolutely fantastic. If you're not, you will not have the opportunities it presents.
Who influenced you the most in terms of your political awareness? Any key figures that has shaped your ideals?
Oh yeah, people joke all the time because I'm always quoting Martin Luther King, and it was my first masters, and I said that period of time when my politics begun to get a bit more disciplined, as opposed to just being angry at unfairness and annoyed at the world, begun to take structure. And what I like about King is also a point of frustration. People often talk about him as though he was some kind of historical teddy bear that everyone could get along with, but King was unpalatable. I mean, he was King's letter. Everyone talks about "I Have a Dream," but that was 1963. He wasn't shot and killed until 68. There's another 5 years in which he became increasingly outspoken on capitalism. I shared an office when I was in DC. I lived in DC for a year, and I shared an office with a man called Reverend Emery Searcy. And Emery was an African-American preacher from Atlanta. So he knew the King family, and he is older than me. So Emery passed away just recently, he's, in his 80s. So he's of King's era, so he knew the King family. And I came across a speech that King gave on the 4th of April 1967 called "A Time to Break the Silence," in which he spoke out against the war in Vietnam. He said, America's on the wrong side of history. He said there are three evils at the heart of American society: militarism, racism, materialism, and militarism. And unless America deals with those, it was on its way to hell. I mean, these are profound, challenges. He started speaking about the war in Vietnam, and Lyndon Johnson, after that speech, apparently called him up and called him every name under the sun. So they gave you the Voting Rights Act, I gave you the Civil Rights Act, and you did this. And actually African Americans stepped away from King because they said, why are you messing about with foreign policy? Our business is segregation in the United States, an opportunity in the United States. And I talked to Reverend Searcy about this letter, and he said that was the letter that signed his death warrant, because he stepped from just he was clearly moving from beyond just having a moral conversation about sitting on mountaintops and judging each other by the content of our character, to actually talking about US investing overseas and extracting profit with no regard for the countries, war, conflict. He crossed that line, and that's where King was. He was a lot less palatable than I think people like to remember.
It seems like those are three key issues that the world is dealing with today.
Prophetic. Well, I worked at the BBC some years ago, and they were looking to make a documentary on the 40th anniversary, it was then, because it was coming up to 2008 of King's assassination. And they were scouting for ideas, and I put those ideas in there. And my idea was, well, if you take King seriously, did the United States ever get on the right side of world history? If King said the US is in danger of losing its soul, did it ever take the measures that King said was necessary to get its soul back? And if it did, when? When was that time? It dealt with those things. So you either take King seriously or you don't. You either put him aside as some kind of irrelevant teddy bear that makes you feel nice at night, or you say, actually, he was talking about some gripping politics here, and we got to wrestle with whether we dealt with the implications of what he was saying to us. So yeah, it's very powerful for me, and it's important he's not misremembered. And that is one of the things that the establishment does. It takes the heroes and rebrands them and turns them into what they need those heroes to be. And it's important that we don't allow that to happen to King.
I didn't know about that speech, and it's very interesting, and I'm sure a lot of people have just been educated a bit more on Martin Luther King, because all we do hear about him is the "I have a dream," the nice side, his religious side, and always preaching non-violence and stuff, but you never ever hear about his political views in the way he's remembered.
No, you've got to do the speech. The King, "I Have a Dream" is a classic speech. You're never going to deny that. But a letter from Birmingham jail, that's a speech. He says in that speech, our greatest opponent on the stride towards freedom is not the Ku Klux Klan or the white citizens councillor, but the white moderate who's more devoted to order than justice. Then he says, people of goodwill with shallow understanding are much more frustrating than outright opposition. Same thing Malcolm X said. Malcolm X said, at least in the South, they're honest with me, right? And King got radicalized when he went to really radical when he went to the North. When he left the South, and it's easy in the South, right? You got a sheriff with a billy club calling you every names and beating you. That's your enemy. When he went to the North, it was Democrat, it was liberal, and yet you had massive segregation, and you come into contact with the fact that actually it's the very nature of the economic system that's churning out, black ghettos and that marginalisation. There isn't necessarily a legislative framework, and then that makes it much more complex, and that was one of the things that really drove King. And I enjoy sharing with people a quote from King when he said, maybe we need segregation for a while, right? People don't like because actually the aim was not just to integrate. The aim was equality. Integration was a means to an end. It wasn't the end. Unfortunately, in the United States, people got mixed up. They think it's integration was the end. Listen, I'm a mixed race guy, so I'm for integration, but that's not the end. And King said we didn't mean to get integrated into cleaning jobs from being teachers. Yeah, and that's where people got confused into, I think, in interpreting King and interpreting the civil rights movement. It was an economic movement as much as it was anything.
Bringing it back to British politics, why is there more engagement by the left in the Black and Asian communities than the right?
Oh, that's a good question. I suppose that you could flip that as well. Would be, I guess, why Black and Asian communities engage with politics of the left more than they do with politics of the right on the whole. And I guess that's because that's the politics that talks about power, hierarchy, redistribution, takes structural inequalities such as institutional racism and discrimination seriously, and has some scope for what you might call redress, or a branch of reparations, repairing those historical wrongs. Certainly for me, that's the reason. Any politics, as you tend to get on the right, that says what you get is down to you as an individual and there's no society around you, there's no structure around you, is one that I find inadequate to describe the world in which I live. So that fundamental view of what it means to be a human being, and also that sense of social responsibility. I believe there's a common good we're all responsible for. I don't believe my responsibility stops at at myself. And I guess there's a connection that's available there that perhaps isn't available on the right, apart from the fact that the far right tends not to like people who look like us anyway. So that doesn't help with the welcome, does it?
No. Bristol made international headlines relating to Black Lives Matter and the Colston statue issues. How did you manage to walk that sensitive line between empathizing with Black Lives Matters and sympathizing with those who don't have Black Lives Matter issues at the forefront of their mind?
So I think the key, what went through my mind, because I ended up in a situation, I'm the mayor, a statue gets pulled down, it's criminal damage by definition, whatever you think, and it's a Black Lives Matter event. At the same, there's another complication within that the Black Lives Matter rally happened in the middle of a pandemic, right? And when you get lots of people together in a pandemic, you increase the likelihood of that pandemic spreading, and the additional complexity to that is that it's people from African heritage and Asian communities died disproportionately from the virus itself. So there's all sorts of things going on. But in my approach, I just thought the best thing to do is not to adopt the position of what I call a wet finger politician. You take a finger, you wet it, stick it in the air, see which way the wind is blowing, attack and try and say the right things. The truth is, in a complicated world, sometimes lots of things can be true at the same time, and they're not easy to hold together. So I just thought, well, just be straight. I'm a mayor. I can't condone criminal damage. But also, I'm a human being. Even if I wasn't descended from enslaved Africans, I'm a human being. I don't want the statue of a slave trader up in the middle of the city. So I'm not going to pretend that seeing it thrown into the harbour doesn't touch me in my soul. So those things are true, and I can't deny they're both true, and I won't deny they're both true. It's just a complicated world. And I think that's how I try to approach that. There was a piece beyond that too, that was my positioning, but also recognising that cities are complicated, and the art of making a city is creating a space in which difference can live together, right? Different views. Now, as long as your difference to me is not rooted in my oppression, as James Baldwin pointed out, then that's okay. We can have difference when differences are not rooted in the oppression of other people. So, but within that, I have to make sure that Bristol, whatever happens during around this statue and what comes after it, Bristol is a city in which those people who are elated at the statue coming down and happy at the way it happened know there is justice in the city, there are fair processes, and it's a place of respect for them. Those people who sympathise with the statue coming down but are dismayed at the way it happened know this is a city in which we do things right, we have processes that are fair, we do our best to make right judgments, and there's justice. Those people who are dismayed at the statue coming down and the way it came down because they feel somehow Colston's a part of them, this is their city too, right? And they have to know that this is a city with fair processes, due process, and this is a place that respects them. And because we all have to keep living together, and that's part of my job as mayor, and that's what I try to set out to do. One of the reasons we have Black Lives Matter, for example, is not because individuals do evil things, it's because processes don't hold individuals to account for evil things they do. So, someone's always going to shoot someone. A police officer's always going to shoot someone or strangle. But what's happened in the United States, people were never found guilty, right? So that's it. So I've been thinking about that a lot, and that's what I've got to make sure, that there are processes here that respect you, respect them, and run fair. Then, if you're in a situation where you didn't get what you wanted, you can live with it, right? Because you know that you've been considered and respected as a full human being. And you didn't get what you wanted today, you might even get what you didn't want, which is worse than not getting what you wanted, right? But on another occasion, we're doing stuff that you like. We're feeding children, we're tackling period poverty, we're building affordable homes. And you can actually say, well, on balance, I didn't like that, but look at the city, we're trying to do the right stuff. And you can stay with the programme, and I think that's what we try to do.
Speaking of Black Lives Matter, how did you feel about Derek Chauvin being found guilty for the murder of George Floyd?
Yeah, I was relieved about that. But that's sad, isn't it? That I was relieved. I mean, he killed someone on camera. We shouldn't feel relieved that he was found guilty. That should be expected. But we were relieved, and I think that says a lot. I think also we've got to be careful in how we, kind of interpret what happened to Chauvin now. That was an event. Events aren't systems. Events aren't system changes. Remember the times when Barack Obama got elected and everyone said, right, we're a post-racial world then. 8 years later, you got Trump elected, right? So we have to be very careful not to overinterpret. It's absolutely welcome. I'm relieved, and it's a good thing. He's been found guilty. But whether the underlying drivers of racial inequality and hierarchy and justice have been changed, that's another question. And Barack Obama put this warning out himself the other day, who never ever claimed to be evidence of a post-racial America, by the way. That was kind of more of a liberal kind of white thing. But I'll share a story with you about a trip I made to the United States. It says that we experienced. So I'd just been elected mayor in May, and in August I was in New York. I was looking for our consulate, right, where our diplomatic representatives are in New York. I'm in a suit, a tie, and I'm the mayor of Bristol. And I couldn't find the building because the skyscrapers all look alike, and I just couldn't find the number. And I looked across the road and I saw a police car, big SUV style truck, parked up. And it was parked with the rear end, it was pointing into the road because they were all angled out. And the rear of the car was up against the pavement. And I could have walked across the road and then should have walked onto the pavement, walked along, and came up from the rear of the car. And I made a calculation, in a split second, not to do that. I'm not going to approach this police officer from behind. I'm going to come in the road and walk across the road and walk straight in front of him so he sees me coming. And I thought, it's not a big thing, but I made that calculation that I didn't want that police officer to see me as a threat, and sneak up on him from behind. I may have been paranoid, but I'm drawing on stuff here. And then I was also saying, which was a very sad thing, I realised, I got to speak so he knows I'm English and I'm not African American, right? Because an English accent in the United States gives you a little bit of a white pass, right? And that's not an effort to be white. It's an effort to find safety, because they won't perceive you as a threat if they think you're British, right? Because they don't see you as with that history of African American threat. And that was a very sad moment for me, because I lost some of that solidarity. And this was all subconscious. It was really quick. And I realised I did it afterwards. But I was like, just speak, then you'll know you're not a threat. you know. I'm not saying he would have drawn his gun on me. I had a suit and tie on, but I was going through all these, and I said to my wife, "Is that what it means to be white? You never even do that." 'Cause my wife's a white American. Is that what it means to be white? That you would not even go through all those calculations about your sense of how a police officer sees you as a threat or not, or what angle you approach them from, whether they see you come in, and I mean, that must be the privilege, and that's one of the reasons, as they say, African Americans, but black people everywhere, will have a disproportionate amount of stress-related illness because we're always running these calculations. We're always triangulating. Okay, how do we navigate this? Is that me? Or is it them? How do I deal with this situation?
Yeah, it's very sad, to be honest, because it does happen all the time where everything you do, you have to be thinking, I wonder what they're going to think of me doing this, or is this the right move to make, and it would just be basic things like just asking for help or something.
I'll say a couple of things. I mean, since being elected mayor, actually, one of the other political parties has they've tried to create a brand, and I've actually had letters written in saying they found me physically threatening. Yeah, and it's because I looked them in the eye and talked to them. But and a real kind of posh. There's a guy in the city. He's quite posh, double barrel second name and all that. And he's written a kind of a letter trying to sabotage me recently. And in this public statement he put on Facebook the other day, he said he approached me once after an event, and I was so angry, that passion. He thought I was going to hit him. That's just not true. I looked him in the eye, but I'm not stupid enough to display my anger. I may have, even if I was feeling angry, which I didn't because he's insignificant. But that constant kind of branding of being a physical threat doesn't escape me, even though, I'm elected. And as you talk about, again, as we navigating this world, we did a hustings the other day, and two of the parties didn't turn up. It's not a point, but I just say one of the other candidates clearly knew nothing about black people and our experience. And then it struck me, there was a line in a documentary I watched some years ago called The Colour of Fear, which I really recommend people watching. It's absolutely amazing. And there's a black man in it, African American, and he says to a white guy, I have to understand your world because I navigate it every day. You don't need to understand my world because you never have to. And that, when that hustings the other day, that really struck me. There's nothing about our world. A third of our school population in Bristol is of African or Asian heritage. And he knows nothing about that third of the, it's just frightening, isn't it? Right? It's just one of the reasons we have to come into leadership. African heritage, Asian heritage, working class, I'd say too, we're one of the most socially mobile countries in the OECD, people from poor backgrounds of white heritage too. We have to get a greater diversity in leadership so that the systems reflect us, think like us, and are accountable to us as well. And we're not just operating within systems over which we have no influence.
How do you see Bristol? How do you hope Bristol would be in 5 or 10 years' time?
So the way I've historically seen Bristol is a city of contradictions. It's an incredible city that has a fantastic story to tell to the outside world. 2 world-class universities, robotics centre, a third of the world's natural history broadcasting, foodie culture, really progressive, city of protest and all that. And all that stuff's true. But tens of thousands of people in the city don't share in that. Right? 1 in 4 of our children growing up in income-deprived households, families at risk of hunger, cold homes. And I see that contradiction within the city. Even the kind of progressive, huge Black Lives Matter rally in the city, and yet, Runnymede will say we're the 7th worst city to be black in, right? We hold these two things together, these contradictions. But what I want to see in 5 years is a city that's fairer, and I don't mean fair in a light way. I think fairness is absolutely critical to democratic legitimacy and resilience, sustaining. So I want a city that's fairer. When I ran for mayor in 2012, I went to a hustings, and the very first hustings I went to was a property developers hustings, and I was on stage with 3 white men, probably all over the age of 65, if I'm not being uncharitable to them. And as I looked out on the audience, I thought, no one's looking at me and thinking, that guy's the mayor. These guys look like the mayor. But today, the mayor does look like me, and he looks like you, and he looks like our children. And today the mayor does share a background with people who spent time living in a refuge or on housing estates or on the edge of town, or working class backgrounds. And I hope that can't be put back in the bottle. So I want more. My hope is that in 5 years, that the city has got used to greater diversity in leadership. But I also hope our communities are more tuned into being leaders as well, because I think there can be a fear when there's a history of being excluded. People get used to it, and we're used to just sitting on the margins and talking about how rubbish leadership is, and we don't get used to stepping across the line and actually taking the chance that, I'll step across the line and I might not succeed in everything I want to do, and then my community might tear me down, because that's the other dynamic for us, right? Look at you built there and you haven't done nothing. You haven't ended racism in 2 years. What you've been doing? Which is how, God, sometimes I feel. So yeah, I hope that model of leadership is transformed, but in a much fairer, more inclusive city that's really done a job in tackling poverty, but also sustainability. We've got to decarbonise our economy as well, but
Do you have aspirations to progress in the Labour Party and maybe become the Labour leader?
That's a big question. Progress is an interesting word. To be honest, I think city leadership is the most exciting place in politics at the moment. I'm linked up with Mayor Yvonne Aki-Sawyer, the Mayor of Freetown. Myself and Yvonne were just co-winners of this global award from the University of Pennsylvania for city leadership. It's amazing. And that was amazing. She's the leader of Freetown in Sierra Leone. That might be where my people come from originally. And we are there at the University of Pennsylvania, Ivy League University, getting this global award for city leaders. 2 black leaders. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. It's amazing to share it with Yvonne. But there are global networks of city leaders who are really connecting and acting with a dynamism and a purpose that national politicians are not offering right now. So it's a really exciting place. But I do get asked about, national leadership, and we'll see what happens. I'm reading Obama's book at the moment, Promised Land, and one of the points that is made to him when he was talked to, that Ted Kennedy said to him, sometimes you don't choose the time, sometimes the time chooses you. And, who knows what will happen. Out of this, I'd like to do a bit of TV, hopefully do a book, and spend a bit more time with my children, because I've deprived them over the last little few years.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you'll be a success in whatever you choose to do next.
Thank you.
How do you feel about the number of Tory MPs that are black and ethnic minority, and why do you think this is?
Well, that's one of them big questions. So obviously, it's anyone's right of any ethnicity, racial identity to join any political party they want. And it is not necessarily the case that because someone's black, they have to be on the left. But I do struggle if someone who looks like me will have some shared history, is supporting a party that's advancing policies that I think actually entrench racial inequality. That doesn't mean that anyone thinks those policies are overtly racist, but when you do not tackle inequality, when you attempt to define away institutional racism, which is what's going on with the Sewell report recently, when you impose, when you bring past 10 years of austerity, that really undermines the ability of local government, I would say in particular here, to invest in those things that get children off to the best possible start in life. Children from our communities who don't have all the family assets, the big house, the history of wealth and access to private school, then that's a problem for me, because I think it's not a great thing to do. And beyond race, it's just not, it's not supporting social mobility, it's not supporting people who have been left behind by the economy. So yeah, it disappoints me.
How do you feel the Labour Party has evolved?
Well, it's evolving all the time, because any group of people's evolving. So it depends on what we're talking about. I mean, there's going to be a technological evolvement of the way we do politics. There's an adaptation to a changing world, growing population. Climate wasn't a big threat. So certainly alongside the Labour's historical commitment to working people and working class people and tackling poverty, now the issue of sustainability and the ecological crisis and the loss of nature and biodiversity is, are real, issues that are right in the foreground. So I think the Labour Party's movement around issues has really solidified around that interaction between both social justice and anti-racism and environmental justice. And remember, and actually that all absolutely makes sense, because I've pointed out on many times to the environmental movement, because I think that sometimes they haven't think I looked like an environmentalist, because there's a little bit of a culture thing there, and the environmental movement hasn't always been as inclusive as it could have been. And in fact, social justice movements can recreate the very same social hierarchies they claim to be fighting against, dominated by independently educated people who went to Oxbridge and the rest of it. But as I pointed out, people who get hit first and hardest by environmental destruction actually look like me and my dad, right? And so any work on racism, any work on poverty has to go in hand with work on the environment. We're facing a prospect, unless we take urgent action, of 200 million climate-driven migrants by the middle of this century.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and think the instability, they'll be from the global south, obviously, across Africa, South America, Asia. The instability, the destruction of cultures, villages, destruction of lives, all the death that happens, not just the death that happens on the journey to the north. So taking care of our planet now, again, has to be at the forefront of anyone who's interested in poverty, inequality, social mobility, social justice.
What do you love most about Bristol?
I like that you can get to the edge of it. That's people told me not to say that, but when I was a kid, I do often feel quite trapped where I was, but I always knew I could get to the edge. I could get to a park, for number one. I used to go up Eastfield Park and swim in the rivers when I was a kid. But now I'm older, you can get on the bike. You can be, when I started running a lot, I could get to the sea wall on the edge of the Downs. I could run up from Easton and get to that sea wall over the Avon Gorge. And I knew I was on the edge of Bristol. And I could look out down the gorge and maybe see Avonmouth a little bit and feel not trapped so much. And I think that's an amazing thing. You probably don't, I don't want to put London down, but can you ever feel like you get to the edge of London? So Bristol offers that.
If you didn't have a career in politics, what would you be doing?
Oh, gosh. Well, I could tell you what I wish I would be doing. My first love was to be a Royal Marines officer. But I got an eye condition called keratoconus, so I wasn't able to do it. But, if I could dream it up, I would fix my eye and I would have joined at 21, 22. And I might still be in there today, 20 odd years of service. Outside of that, it's very difficult to know because I tried a few things and they didn't always work out. Like I was at the BBC for 5 years and I was at the BBC for 5 years, didn't get one promotion. So, I really wanted to be a journalist, tell stories and be a voice to the voiceless and, bring the world to people so they can engage with it. But if I have a wish list, maybe journalism.
Any advice for people who want to have a career in politics?
Yeah. So a few things. Do read, and I really encourage people to read. I think biographies are fantastic, but obviously, understand people's stories. That's number one. I think point number two, as I'd say, is try to develop a career, have a profession, because you might not win the election. And it's good to have something you can go to, be you a lawyer, accountant, medic, and then you're never dependent on people. Because what you want if you're elected is never to feel like you have to sell your soul. Like I said, don't be a wet finger politician. You want to have enough behind you that you feel strong enough to say to people, well, you're telling me this, but this is what I think. It's a delicate balance. It doesn't mean you don't listen, but it also means that you're not blown around by whatever opinion poll or wind comes your way. Because I think actually politics between an elected representative and the voter should be a conversation. It shouldn't be I pull a lever and you do what I say. That's, you know, so you'll be stronger in your conversation and genuinely offering leadership if you've got something to go to. If people say, well, I don't want you, you say, well, all right, well, that's your decision. You know, if you don't want, you can say no to me and, you know, I'll go and do something else. And I'd say have a good group of people around you who are prepared to tell you the truth. They'll say, yeah, you are being an idiot. Or don't worry about that, that's nonsense. Because it's really hard when you're in the middle of all that whirlwind sometimes to distinguish between your feelings, your reaction to criticism, truth, you know, valid criticism. You know, it's really hard, and you need people who can take a deep breath and feed back to you what's, you know, what's valid and what's not valid and what's good and what's nonsense.
So you've made history in Bristol, you are a mayor, and you've got so much accomplishments under your belt. What message would you give to an 18-year-old Marvin Rees?
I'd say a couple of things. One is relax and enjoy your life, because I was quite intense. I had fun, but I always had this fear in my background. It may come from my background, I still have, about being poor. And I would say, enjoy your life today a bit more, right? And I would also say something I'd begun to really understand by the time I was 18 anyway, is don't ever let fear, and in particular fear of failure, stop you from trying things. Say yes and give it a go. I was immobilized by fear as a young child, sometimes, fear of failure. And I've learned you've just got to do it. I've heard it was one of the entrepreneurs said, when someone gives you an opportunity, say yes. If they say, can you do it? Say yes, and then try and work out how to do it. But, you know, and I would just say fear is natural. You're going to be scared lots through your life. All right, that's going to come. Don't ever, and you're going to fail. That's normal, but you just got to crack on. I think that's what I'd say.
Lastly, what is your message to Bristol in the lead up to the mayoral elections?
Oh, it's a bit cheap, isn't it, for me to say vote for me? I don't know. You know, you just. I think that it's been a incredibly challenging 5 years for Bristol and the world. Actually, we've had a pandemic, the first like this in 100 years. We've had the uncertainty of Brexit. The vote went through just after I was elected. Not my fault. We've had racial tumult. We've had growing inequality, and you layer on top of that the growing awareness of both the climate and the ecological crises. Underlying all that, government started its policy of austerity in 2010, which meant less and less funding for a growing population and growing need in Bristol. And I think in spite of all that, we've done some good things here. You know, we've had I think we've held together ambition and compassion. So ambition, you can see the cranes on the horizon, stuff's getting built. Channel 4's come to Bristol. We had the Global Parliament of Mayors. We got a phenomenal we've won numerous international awards here. You know, we've got homes being built for people. Lots of good things happening. But we've done it in a way that, you know, at the same time, we've fed our hungry children. You know, we've tackled period poverty. We've done totally overhauled the city's approach to domestic violence and abuse. And I think nothing's perfect. You know, I'm a fallen human being with an imperfect political party and a broken political system in a fallen world. That's what we work with. But I think, you know, we've done our best, and I think on the whole we've done okay.
Well, thank you, Marvin. It was a pleasure to interview you today. Viewers, I hope you enjoyed that, and you heard the man. Vote for Marvin. Thank you.
Thank you.